breaking the wall of misleading national indicators. How economics can measure real progress. Steward Wallis, The New Economics Foundation, London.
When the wall fell, I was at home in Derbyshire in England. I was about to become father any day. So now, my daughter is turning 22.
Hello. It's fantastic to be here. Oops. Yeah. What gets measured gets done. Or another way it's put sometimes is you treasure what you measure. That statement is usually attributed to Peter Drucker, and I think is largely true, which is why it's so fundamental that we measure the right thing. I'm going to tell you today that we're measuring the wrong thing in terms of national progress, tell you about the breakthrough that's being made right now in measuring the right thing, and explore some of the implications and breakthroughs that might follow from that. Now first, a bit of gloom. Many of our advanced economies, or so-called advanced economies, are suffering four interlinked and systemic problems, and these are long-term problems. I call them the four U's of economics, or the four horsemen of economics. Unsustainable. Not only, as we've heard already, do we face the risk of serious or runaway climate change, but the very life support systems on which we depend, the ecosystems and the ecosystem services, are being degraded. The UN recently said that 15 out of the 25 key ecosystems are in decline or serious decline. That covers things like fresh water, pollination systems, topsoil, vital life support systems. Unfair. There's about 400 people in this audience. Well, the top 400 richest Americans now have the same amount of wealth as, wait for it, the bottom 155 million Americans. That's the distribution. Unstable, well, you all read the newspapers, I don't need to say anything there. Clearly, we've built our systems either with too much debt, but particularly we've built our economic systems for efficiency, supposedly, and not resilience. We haven't built in the safety nets, and as a result, they're not either efficient or resilient often. And lastly, that word unhappy. In my country, the UK, the economy doubled in GDP terms from 1980 to 2005. Well-being was flat. In America, it went down in the same period. We're not getting any happier despite that. Now, what do we measure? We measure gross national product at the minute. And Robert Kennedy, famously, in his ill-fated presidential bid back in 1969, said a brilliant thing about gross national product. He pointed out how pollution increased it, war increased it, cutting down the redwood trees increased it, and he ended by saying this, that it measures everything except that which makes life worthwhile. And the OECD, we lost a bit off the top, basically said just recently that just relying on GDP is like driving a car without a speedometer. And obviously, we need to know whether our economies are overheating or about to run out of fuel. So we need some other things on the dashboard. But even that's not enough, because if we get back some of our economies to full speed, the key thing is, are we going in the right direction? It's no use getting up to full speed if we're going the wrong way. What is the right way? Well, we believe the goal of a good economy is to achieve high well-being, as Dennis has already said, social justice, and do so within fair ecological limits. That's what we should be aiming at. And we've been working for the last 15 years on how you measure well-being, and using survey techniques and others, and what it's correlated to, and what the implications are for policy. Well-being and flourishing, I think one can use interchangeably. And what it means, it's much more than just being happy. I could be happy high on an illegal substance, but I wouldn't be flourishing, would I? Flourishing means you're functioning well, and you're experiencing good feelings about yourself and about your purpose in life, both day-to-day and overall. And a fairly simplified model feelings and functionings there, but they depend on two other things. They depend on your own psychological resources, how you live, and they depend on external conditions. A little bit about both those. Personal flourishing. In the UK, there's an advertising campaign that says, if you want to be healthy, you have 5 fruit and veg a day, 5 a day. Well, these are the 5 a day of well-being. Connect. Fundamental. How you relate to your friends, your loved ones, the quality of your relationships is absolutely vital. Be active, not my strongest suit, but important. Take notice. Just that simple thing. How many of you wandered out and looked at the river today and seen what the weather's doing, the color of the trees? It actually matters whether we look around, whether we take notice, whether we are living in the present. Keep learning. And that last one, the most uneconomic thing. Look in economics and you can't see much about giving, yet it's fundamental to our well-being. How we give of our time, our love, our resources is the key to our well-being. But well-being is more than just affected by those. It's also affected by external conditions. So, if unemployment goes up, if inequality goes up, if instability, either at the economy level or at individual jobs, if environmental pollution goes up, if social fragmentation goes up, and I should have added, if debt goes up, our well-being goes down. And the reverse is true, though not necessarily proportionally. Now, the breakthrough we've made is we've been working with people in the UK government, the chief statistician, for many years, trying to persuade them, and this is with others, Professors Layard, Stiglitz, Sen, lots of other people in this field, but together we've all been saying for a long time, it's really important to start measuring well-being. But the UK government is committed to measure well-being as a headline indicator. The first data will be available in July next year. The whole of the civil service is going through the initial test of the questions. All the top 200 civil servants are going to a days-long induction in this. The appraisal manuals of government are being changed. And everybody who's been inducted in the civil service, they're taking it very seriously. They're going to measure well-being. And this is what David Cameron said. It says it is the serious business of government. And last week, we had the head of the civil service and who ex-head of the Treasury in the UK called Sir Gus O'Donnell, who's known affectionately in the British civil service as God by his initials. He came along and talked about the implications of starting to measure well-being. And he said a very interesting thing. He said that he thought within 10 years, well-being would be the headline indicator, our well-being would be the fundamental thing we're measuring, and GDP would be a subsidiary indicator. Now, I hope he's right, but as I left the room, somebody said, "You're very lucky, you know." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you've got God on your side." So we'll see. What's a framework for measuring societal progress? We've done a lot of work on this as well. The goal on the right-hand side is high well-being. And you need to look at the distribution of that, what percentage of the population are flourishing. The key fundamental resource is environmental resources, and we've seen and we've heard how that's going to be one of the scarcest things we face. Economic activity is the way one is translated into the other. And so you've got at least 2/3 efficiencies there. But perhaps the most interesting one is that one of how effective are we going to be at translating environmental resources through all our different processes into high well-being. And a study we've done, forgive the amount on this chart, but don't worry about it too much, has on the left-hand side happy life years. It's a combination of how much well-being in each country there is and how long people live. And down the bottom is what Dennis was talking about earlier, ecological footprint. And about just below the 2 point, the 002 on the bottom there, is countries that are living within planetary means. Getting over a footprint of 2 means you're living beyond the ability of the planet to, in the long term, to regenerate itself. On the top right you have the USA. People living generally quite long lives, quite high levels of well-being, but consuming 5 planets' worth of resources in doing so. Down here on the bottom, you have a lot of the sub-Saharan African countries. Levels of well-being aren't high, and sadly, because of HIV and many other things, longevity, people don't live a long time. Up there in the top left on its own is Costa Rica in the green zone. Costa Rica has the highest level of well-being of any country in the world. It has people live longer than the USA, and it's doing so virtually within planetary means. It's too long to go into why, but a bit of Latin magic, abolishing their army in 49, making all their electricity, 99% of their electricity from renewable resources, and a carbon tax, or should I say carbon fee. So, what happens then? Sorry, I should just say on that, the key, clearly, is to get all the countries up the left-hand side. That's the direction. So when we talk about are we going in the right direction or the wrong direction, that's what matters. A number of countries are going off to the right, and some of them are dipping down. So they're using up too much planetary resources, that's increasing, their well-being's going down. We want all the countries up in the top left-hand corner. That's the direction we want. So if we start measuring well-being in the UK, and Australia has also taken over and said it will use the same types of questions and data as well, and I think it will spread to lots of other countries. Oops, can I get... What's the implications for policy? Well, as Gus O'Donnell said, virtually everything. But just to mention a couple of simple ones. Sports, art and music, both in schools and the community, have a tremendous impact on well-being. That's something we should be investing in far more heavily. The design of our cities, the design of our workplaces, the changes are massive. But it might, and this is where I speculate about the future, it might do something else as well. It might change that central dynamic. I pointed out at the beginning those 4 U's. It just might, if we're measuring the right thing, get us to think about what we want in life. We might see a value shift. It might help a value shift from being consumers to stewards. It might even help us with the whole issue of climate change. It's very difficult, and I've done this for quite a time, telling people, you've had it if we don't change. That's not very compelling. Getting across, we can actually have better lives, higher well-being, and do so on lower carbon. That's a much more interesting message. That's one that could win. So this could change things dramatically. And I think it will also change macroeconomics and the economics as a whole. Because if ever there's a wall that needs to fall, it's how we particularly practice economics, but also the theory in some cases. We'll need to rethink resilience. We'll need to be able to distinguish between that growth that is economic in terms of creating well-being, in terms of creating good jobs, and that growth that is uneconomic. So uneconomic growth, that's a new term for you, but think about it. Similarly, that growth that's sustainable and that growth that's unsustainable. And this issue of rethinking efficiency and productivity. If actually the key scarce resource is natural resources, natural capital, and if what we're trying to maximize is well-being and jobs, then we might have to satisfy some returns to capital, and we might even have to accept labor productivity that goes in the wrong direction. That changes economics totally. And it helps us deal with this, what I call the overconsumption dilemma. In the medium term, we're going to face the situation where if we carry on as we are, we're running out of planet, we're over-consuming, we're foot's on the accelerator too much. But if we try and move the foot to the brake, all we do at the minute is put a lot of people out of work, cause greater recession. That's not an answer to stop people consuming. The issue is to change not just the measurement, but the incentives, the institutions in the economy, so that we have an economy that's still going to be a market economy, but runs to a very different metric. And that requires what I call a great transition of our economies. So measuring the right thing might help start us get there. I think it's so fundamental, though, that one is clear where we're trying to go, and we've got measurements about how we might get there. That will change things in ways that I can't begin to imagine. Thank you.